Welcome to the Friday Happy Hour with victory strategist, award-winning author and your happy hour host, Annmarie Kelly. Each week, Annmarie chats with women who have reinvented, started over or wrote fabulous next chapters. They share how they overcame their midlife challenges and how you can too. So kick back with some good happy hour something to drink and enjoy today's show.
Welcome. You're listening to the Friday Happy Hour with me, Annmarie Kelly. I'm the recovering good girl and your victorious woman empowerment partner. This is the place where us victory chicks and you men who care about us meet on Fridays to chat about the week and to find ways to live more powerfully and make our lives better. And I'm glad you came to Happy Hour today. Thanks for joining me. Recently one of my colleagues found out that her spouse was cheating on her with someone from work, and she was devastated. Not only because it was betrayal, which would have been enough, but it wasn't the first time. Though this time she decided it was going to be the last time, at least for her. But when I heard about it, I didn't know what to say that would be a help. Now, it's probably no surprise to you I had a lot to say, but I don't know if it would have been, if anything I would have said at that point would have been helpful. But today's guest, Carole Brody-Fleet, would have known. Carole calls herself the widow who wears stilettos, and she's coming to Happy Hour today to talk about her own reinvention and what to do when bad things happen to good women, which is the title of her newest book. But first, the world changed a little yesterday when Britain voted to leave the European Union. That was a really big deal. And I didn't know what was going to happen, when it was going on, and I wasn't paying attention last night, but I was watching the business shows a little this morning, and, between that and our presidential elections, it should be an interesting couple of months for our IRA and 401ks. And if you haven't looked at them today, don't. I didn't. But just from listening to the shows, I know it's bad. So don't, you and I don't need that to ruin our weekend. So wait until Monday, and maybe things will even stabilize a little between now and then. Hey, listen, remember last week when I was saying that there must be some kind of dark cloud hanging over Orlando? Well, I emailed our Happy Hour psychic, the amazing Christy Cavallo, and here's what she said, that it wasn't a dark cloud, but this is her quote: "It is a path of awakening humanity to be aware and not walk in a foggy existence. It's about paying attention to what is being said and what is being written as the veils of illusion are being removed for clarity." Now, you victory chicks and guys, I know that's a little vague, but I thought about what those veils of illusion are, and I wondered if the illusion is that our politicians are again using the terrorist attack in Orlando, the worst radical Islamic terrorist attack in the United States since 9/11, to grandstand their own ideological views, especially about gun control. And here's why I think it's grandstanding and so disingenuous. Talking about Orlando means not talking about Chicago or places like Chicago, like Philadelphia. In Chicago, the murders were up 72% this year, and shootings are up 88%. And Illinois has some of the toughest gun laws in the country. But still, this morning alone, 48 people, this month alone, not this morning, this month alone, 48 people were murdered, and most of them young black men, and the youngest murder victim was only 2 months old. And if you don't believe me, I posted the link to it that lists all of those, and I think almost all guys. I posted the link on today's radio wrap-up at victoriouswoman.com. And not only does Chicago have some of the toughest laws in the country, but according to the Chicago Tribune newspaper, police last year confiscated over 5,000 guns. And they were taking them at a rate of about 20 a day. Now, Philly is better, but even here, homicides in Philly are up 9% in 2016. And both cities in both cases, that's way more than Orlando's terror-related 49 dead. And none of those murders were terror-related. Still, using the terror attack in Orlando as the focus, the Democrats this week put on a full court press to get gun legislation passed and did nothing about terrorism, didn't even mention it. Do they not realize with terror attacks happening in places like coffee shops and nightclubs and work-related luncheons how scared people are becoming? Well, apparently not, because as the Democrats disrupted the congressional session doing the same thing that just a couple of years ago they called Republicans morons for doing. And frankly, I don't think they're any more serious than the Republicans. You know, after all, they put on a good show creating havoc in the halls of Congress and gathering their special Guns No More rendition of We Shall Overcome, which is like, you know, kind of put you back to the 1960s. And then they disbanded. And you know why they disbanded? It's the 4th of July break. And apparently nothing, even those oh-so-strong convictions of theirs for gun control, can get in the way of their days off. They're gone for 10 days, and I don't think they care that they poked a hole in their own balloon and sucked out all the air. But listen, more importantly, consider this. It was just a few years ago when Democrats were in the majority in Congress during President Obama's first term. The Democrats could have passed any legislation they wanted, but they didn't. They could also have passed gun control and immigration, anything. They had the votes. They didn't do it. So I think this is all for show. And I always say, and it doesn't matter who I'm talking about, whether it's Democrats, Republicans, or the people I deal with, talk's cheap and actions speak louder than words. Maybe that's what Christy Cavallo was talking about, getting clarity and getting out of a foggy existence. And it's not just one party doing it. And maybe the veil has been the hypocrisy in D.C. And that's the thing you and I are tired of. But listen, on the lighter side of Friday, I'm wondering if any of you know who Charlie Gracie is. And if you don't, I'll tell you what I know and why he's on my radar today. Charlie Gracie had a couple of hits in the 1950s. Then, I guess in the 1960s, he faded from the national scene. But he didn't fade from the local scene. When I was a kid growing up in Havertown, where I think Charlie Gracie lived, and I think he still lives, he played at a bar on Eagle Road across from the Manoa Shopping Center. I think for years, I think he played for years, and I didn't go there. Of course, I was still a kid in the backseat of my parents' car fighting with my siblings. But on the days when we weren't trying to kill each other, I remember seeing his name, like, time after time as we drove past the bar on our way to the shopping center. I didn't know anything about him until years later when, in my 20s, I got friendly with a woman who loved Charlie Gracie, and she loved Patsy Cline, also somebody I didn't know anything about. Whenever she had company, she played Charlie Gracie and Patsy Cline music. Well, she probably played other stuff too, but I was in my 20s. I was into Bruce Springsteen and Prince and Billy Joel, so that 1950s rock and roll and country music didn't impress me, at least not then. Well, I guess it was maybe about 10 years ago, and it was definitely after I had Sirius Radio on my car, 50s on 5, that I started developing a serious taste for 1950s music. Buddy Holly, the Everly Brothers, they're so good. And the Platters are my favorites. And if you don't know them, go to victoriouswoman.com and listen to my favorite Platters tune. It's called My Prayer, and it's dripping with romance. And so are some of their other songs, like Only You and The Magic Touch. You know, I think that music touches your soul, like right down to your root chakra. I think it's the best romantic music if you want to snuggle up with your dancing partner. Now, the Platters, like Charlie Gracie, are rock and roll. Patsy Cline was country. 2 years ago, I was speaking in North Carolina, and on my way to Asheville, I stopped in Virginia to the Shenandoah Valley Museum for a Patsy Cline exhibit. Now, I think it was there for a couple months, just happened to be that I was passing through there. I think it ended up at the Country Music Hall of Fame. And what a cool exhibit it was. And I found this fabulous white cowgirl hat with sparkles. Most people don't see me in a cowgirl hat, and you know, but it was everything I could do not to buy it. And the reason I wanted to buy it, and it's the reason it made it so fabulous, I looked fabulous in it. But I didn't buy that hat. What I did buy was a digitally remastered Patsy Cline CD. And I sang her songs the whole rest of the way to Asheville. In fact, I think I wore out a couple of the tracks. My two favorite songs are Crazy and I Fall to Pieces. So I kept playing those two over and over again. And if you know that song Crazy, Willie Nelson wrote it. But it was Patsy that gave it the pizzazz. I posted that YouTube clips of both the Platters singing My Prayer and Patsy Cline singing Crazy on today's radio wrap-up at victoriouswoman.com. But I have to tell you, if you watch Patsy, and I want you to know this, I can't sing like her, but when I'm lip syncing, my moves are better. I have great moves. Anyway, back to Charlie Gracie. His big song was Butterfly, and for some reason this summer, I'm just fascinated by him. And maybe it's because at 80 years old, he's playing everywhere, including headlining a show at the Rose Tree Park concert series. And just for some perspective, the Beatles' George Harrison said Charlie Gracie's guitar playing was brilliant. And if anyone knew a thing or two about guitar playing, it was George Harrison. Well, him and Prince, but George Harrison knew Charlie. So take a look at a TV performance of Charlie Gracie singing Butterfly in 1957. And if you've never been to Rose Tree Park, you should take a look at the schedule. I posted a link on the radio wrap-up at victoriouswoman.com. They have free concerts 5 nights a week until mid-August. And you can hear everything, big band, Cajun, Eric Clapton, Ozzy Osbourne, everything. There's something for every age and every taste. You know, you can go, you bring a beach chair, you get a blanket or something, and you sit under the stars and listen to your favorite music. And if you know Charlie Gracie, and I think he still lives in Havertown, tell him I can't wait to see him perform on July 24th at Rose Tree Park. So, and take a look at those YouTube links. But listen, not before you meet our guest today, Carole Brody-Fleet. I invited her to join us for happy hour because she touches on the place that all of us go from time to time when bad things happen in our life. And too often we don't know what to do when we get there. Well, Carole Brody-Fleet has been there and back. She's an award-winning author who you might know from some of the Chicken Soup for the Soul books, the Huffington Post, ThirdAge.com, or from one of her many TV shows that she's appeared on. Her newest book, When Bad Things Happen to Good Women, is designed not only to help you if the bad thing is happening to you, but also how to help your girlfriends when they're the ones having the bad time. So listen, go get some good happy hour, something to drink, and when we come back, Carole Brody-Fleet will be with us. You're listening to the Friday Happy Hour. Remember when you wished you had more time for yourself? And now you have it, but you notice you're keeping busy with stuff, but that stuff isn't making you feel happy or filled up? And when you think about what would make you happy and filled up, you get stuck or feel overwhelmed. And then you go back to what's more familiar, more comfortable, even if it's not making you happy. Wouldn't you love to find a way to start making sense of that deep discontent you're feeling? Well, you're not alone. I'm Annmarie Kelly, author, victory strategist, and the radio show host of the Friday Happy Hour. And I know there's a place for you, one that other women have found to be both inspirational and empowering. And it's the Victorious Woman Project. Go there now and get on my mailing list, where you'll be the first to know about my upcoming online workshops, teleseminars, and more. And while you're there, take a couple minutes to look over my blog. You can download some of the free stuff I have for you and let it get your creative juices going. I'm looking forward to meeting you at the Victorious Woman Project. And that's at www.victoriouswoman.com. Welcome back to the Friday Happy Hour. I'm Annmarie Kelly, and I'm here with Carole Brody-Fleet. Hi, Carole. Welcome.
Hi, Annmarie. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm so glad you could come to Happy Hour today.
Oh, I'm happy to be with you.
Thank you. Carole, listen, you were like a lot of us, living a pretty normal life, and you were a paralegal for a long time. And then you became a sales director of a cosmetic company. And,
right.
You know, your everydays were like most of ours. You know,
That's right.
Yeah, and then it happened. Your spouse, Mike, an award-winning police officer and a veteran of the armed forces, got sick, and it wasn't with a cold. What happened?
That's right. Back in 1998, that's exactly where I was. I'd left the legal profession and had found great success in my new pursuit. Mike was just on the cusp of retirement after 28 years from the police department. And our daughter, Kendall, was 9 years old at the time, and she was very busy being 9 years old. And that's where we were when Mike was diagnosed with ALS, which is more commonly known as Lou Gehrig's disease. And that diagnosis altered the trajectory of all of our lives forever.
Yeah. And you know, because when he got diagnosed, and as everybody knows, it's not just the person with the disease who has to deal with that news and what follows. It becomes a family affair.
That's absolutely right, because everybody in the family is touched and affected by that illness, not physically, but certainly emotionally and practically, and everything that you do in your life is dictated by that illness. The severity that day, how the patient is doing that day. Very quickly, Mike got to a point where he could not be left alone at all. So it really dictated every movement that we made in our lives.
When you first got the news, and I know you take some of this into when bad things happen to good women, but when you and Mike first got that diagnosis, what was the first thing you did?
Honestly, the first thing we did was we went to a bar. I'm not kidding. After we got the diagnosis, we were walking to the car, and it was a long drive home because we had traveled into Los Angeles to see specialists, and we didn't say a word because neither one of us, we were both so in shock. And finally, Mike said, "You want to go get a drink?" And at that moment in time, Annmarie, nothing sounded better to me. I will be very honest.
I'll bet.
So that was the very first thing we did. But after we went home, I cried nonstop. And then when I thought I couldn't cry anymore, I did. And then, and this is how I tend to react, because I'm not very patient, and I don't bother with things like stages or degrees of grief. I went from shock to, okay, how are we going to fix this? What do we do now?
You know what, Carole? So many of us would do exactly that same thing. It's like, well, I have to be able to fix this.
Because we're women.
That's right.
And women are fixers.
Yep.
And women are nurturers. And women are problem solvers. It's what we do. Now, I knew that what that diagnosis meant. They are making great strides with ALS and trying to get a handle on this thing. But the reality is that diagnosis paints a very grim and realistic future. So my job was to get as much information as I could from as many resources I could find. You know, it doesn't matter the negativity that we're touched by or the bad thing that we're touched by. The enemy of negativity is education and proactivity. And I got proactive as quickly as possible.
But that makes good sense, and most of us, I think, would probably do that. But Mike made a decision not to use any extraordinary methods to stay alive. How did you handle that? I don't think I would have handled that very well.
Not at all well. I'm going to be very honest, listeners. I did not handle that at all well. I refer to it now as a lively discussion that we had on this subject because at that moment in time, I asked people to understand that when we had that lively discussion, which is code for we went to the woodshed argument, we were at the beginning of this illness. I had not yet witnessed firsthand the horrors of this illness. And at that moment in time, Annmarie, you are going to plug anything in, including a blow dryer, to keep that person you love alive. But Mike was adamant about how this was going to play out. It was his life. And when you have no control over a situation, and certainly there's not a lot you can control about this disease or any in general, but certainly this one, that he was going to control what he could. And he decided that there was not going to be extraordinary intervention. His grand compromise to me was allowing the placement of a feeding tube if it became necessary, which it did. So that was his grand gesture. It actually became, if you can believe, it became somewhat of a standing joke, is that this was his big compromise to me. And I grabbed it. But from the moment he was diagnosed to the moment that he knew, and we all knew, that the end was near, he never wavered from his decision to not permit extraordinary intervention to keep him alive.
And how long was it from the time he was diagnosed until he died?
From the time he was diagnosed to the time he passed was 2 years and 3 months. Now, he was symptomatic for almost a full year before that, but you have to understand that the testing for this illness is not simple. It is not take a blood test and bam, that's what you have. It's a rule-out process, and it's a long process. And in and amongst all that, we have to remember that this is the last diagnosis that a doctor wants to give you. So they are going to make darn sure that this is what, in fact, you are dealing with when they render that diagnosis. So he was symptomatic for over 3 years, but from firm diagnosis to death was just a skosh over 2 years.
And he died right before Christmas. And
right before Christmas and in the middle of Hanukkah.
And you know, Carole, I don't think there's any time of the year that's better, but I've heard a lot of people talk about how when the death comes at that time of year, they get angry being in the middle of all that merriment. And, in fact, a couple people told me they stopped putting up their Christmas tree. That was the last time. They didn't put it up that year, and they never put it up again. How are you about that?
That makes me sad. And at the same time, it bolsters me to work harder at my job. Because I want to bring people back to a place of life and happiness. And when we were in that moment, when he passed away, in the middle of our, two major holidays, because we were an interfaith couple, obviously we were not in a place of merriment. But I quickly discovered in subsequent years that you can observe a holiday without celebrating it. There is a difference between observation of a holiday and celebrating a holiday. And there are wonderful, beautiful ways that you can observe a holiday quietly and introspectively and peacefully without feeling like you have to put on a party hat or deck the halls or sing the songs or what have you. And you can bridge that crevice between abject despair and dancing on a table. There is a happy medium. And I love educating people on things that they can do and how they can get back to a place of peace. And how the holidays, even today, the holidays, every year they take on a different complexion. And we honor how we feel that particular year, and then we go with that feeling.
Well, one of the things you talk about in When Bad Things Happen to Good Women, you actually describe a couple things that happened once Mike was diagnosed, and then you say there are 3 things that you should never do when someone has a terminal illness. And I know I've done one of them. So what are the 3 things?
The first thing that you don't want to do is what I call the dance. You don't want to do the dance. My favorite example is when 2 of Mike's work colleagues came over. And it was going to be a boys' afternoon, and it was going to be a bunch of, insults and remember whens and all of that. And it was. And they talked about everything, the funny call-outs and the golf games and the beers and all the great things. Not once did either of them mention the fact that Mike was sick. And he was very much ensconced in the illness at that point. He was in a wheelchair. He could not speak and be readily understood.
Wow.
So he was very, very affected at that point. And after they left, Mike looked at me, and it was with a very sad look, and he said, they never once asked me how I was or acknowledged the illness. And he said, but, nobody really does anyway, so I guess I shouldn't be surprised, or words to that effect. And it broke my heart. I thought, it's true. With the exception of 2 very dear friends who I do discuss in the book, nobody said, hey, how you doing? How's it going? What does the doctor say? Nobody brought it up, and it did become the elephant in the room, and that elephant's name was ALS. And it's okay to say, hey, how's it going? What does the doctor say? What is the next thing that you're going to do? Or are you taking a therapy? Not bringing it up doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It means that you're taking a situation that is very serious and making it reductive. You are eliminating somebody's need to talk, to say things to you, to talk about how they feel. So we don't want to do the dance. They know they're sick. It's okay if you acknowledge that. Never say, call me if you need anything.
You know what, Carol? That's the one that I have done. It's like
we all do.
But you know
We've
what?
all done that.
But you know what? For me, it was like I don't want to tread on their privacy.
Right.
I don't want to butt in where I'm not, needed or wanted.
Right.
So I don't know that I would be saying, I would be more inclined to say, call me if you need something. Then you say not to do that. What do you say?
The reason why I say, and like you just said, we've all said it. It's almost reflexive in nature. And on its face, it's a very lovely gesture. And no doubt you're being very sincere in that. But that call's never going to come, Annmarie. I'm not going to pick up the phone and say, Annmarie, I really need to come over for a coffee. I need you to pick up my kids or run to the grocery store. I need to cry. I need to laugh. I need someone who's not going to say something goofy to me. And we all know what I'm talking about there. No one's going to do that. Why is that? Well, first of all, nobody wants to feel like a burden. So I'm not going to pick up the 100-pound telephone and call you because I feel burdensome. And then also, as a society, we have gotten it into our collective heads that it's a sign of weakness to reach out for help. So if the situation at hand includes something like, I've lost a job, or I've been left by a spouse, or I've been broken up, you can add a scoop of self-esteem battering on top of that. Nobody wants to feel weak or like a loser or like I'm going to depress you. And that makes reaching out a lot more difficult. So instead of saying, call me if you need anything, do something. Be proactive. Say, Jane, pick a day. We're going to go out to lunch. If Jane's not up to lunch, Jane, I want to bring lunch in. I want to take you out for a coffee. Or when do your kids get out of school? I'm going to pick them up. Or assess the particular situation and then do something. Because if you're close enough to somebody to say, call me if you need anything, you're close enough to them to do something.
Carol, we have to take a break, but when we come back, I want to explore this a little bit more with you. And you had such good stories in when bad things happen to good women. So let's talk about those when we come back. Everybody hang in there. You're listening to the Friday Happy Hour. Hi, this is Annmarie Kelly, author, victory strategist, and the radio show host of the Friday Happy Hour. I trust you're enjoying my conversation with this fabulous, victorious woman. If you're getting inspired with ideas and feeling empowered, this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's more for you. Tips, downloads, resources at the Victorious Woman Project. Go to victoriouswoman.com and look around and get on my mailing list so you can be the first to know about the newest good things I have for you. That's www.victoriouswoman.com. Back to the Friday Happy Hour. I'm here with Carole Brody-Fleet, and we were talking about 3 things that you should never do when you know that someone has a terminal illness, and one of them was the dance, and the second thing is to ask them to call if they need something, but rather that you should be proactive. And the worst thing that you say, Carole, that you can do when you find out is what?
Nothing. Never do nothing. I know that sounds like a double negative, but hang in there with me. A lot of people honestly don't know what to do or what to say or how to react during times of turmoil. And I understand that, and that's why I'm so excited about this book, because there's so much education in there as to what to do and what to say and what not to do. But instead of not doing something, anything, even if it might be the, quote, wrong thing, they do nothing. Mm-hmm. They stay away. And the problem with that is in ignoring the situation, you're not making it disappear. And we saw that very thing happen. The further along in the illness that Mike progressed, the fewer people came to visit and the fewer people came to call to see how he was doing. And the biggest problem, the worst part of it, is he was 100% completely aware. Even though he was very sick, ALS doesn't affect the mind. Mm-hmm. And he knew exactly what was going on. He knew that people were choosing to avoid him because of the illness. He knew it, he voiced it, and it absolutely broke my heart. People who are suffering are not mind readers. They're not sitting at home thinking, well, they do really feel bad for me. They just don't know what to do with me right now. Instead, they're sitting at home thinking that no one cares or that they've been forgotten. Yeah. Now, on top of what you're going through, can you imagine how that feels? It's not up to that person to make you feel better or to ease your way. It's up to you to get out of your own way, to get out of your discomfort, get into the game. Put your feelings aside and get into the game. You have an opportunity to ease somebody's path in the journey of their lifetime.
Now, there's something else that you wrote about that, and I think sometimes it's something that we forget. But you wrote, and it's kind of like in the order of that same thing. It's like about being proactive. You wrote that through challenges and devastations like the one you experienced with Mike, you learn that you're stronger than you think. Mm-hmm. And then, and sometimes, especially at the beginning, you just don't think you can handle it. You think, I don't think I can do this. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I don't think I can. And then you talk about something that, that I agree with, and I learned from every single Victorious Woman interview that I did. And that was about making a choice. And I think that whole idea of making a choice, making a decision is crucial. To me, it's like I noticed that it's a turning point. What do you think?
Exactly. You just took the words out of my mouth. That was a tipping point. Is after Mike had passed away, and you are surrounded by physical wreckage, certainly emotional wreckage, and even financial wreckage. After he passed away. And then I realized that ALS had already taken Mike's life. And it destroyed our dreams and our plans and everything that we'd worked for. And I had no control over that. But at that moment, I could take control over how things were going to go forward. And ALS had already taken Mike's life. It wasn't going to take mine, too. And it wasn't going to destroy Kendall's life, either. It wasn't going to take a young girl on the cusp of adolescence at that point in time and destroy her future. And I also wasn't going to be defined by a destiny that I didn't choose. I was not going to be defined by widowhood or by the word widow. And I also saw an opportunity to model healthy recovery for myself and for my daughter. And all of that together combined, it created a healing pathway that I designed. It finally had some control over how things were going to unfold.
Carole, I think that's really important what you just said, that it's something that you designed it. Mm-hmm. Instead of everything that was going on designing you took control and you designed it, and it became your midlife reinvention.
It did, and I didn't realize it at the time, obviously, because at the time you are just trying to figure out how to take a shower. It's really very rudimentary at the beginning of a healing journey. But about 5 years after Mike passed away, I found myself thinking, wow, we've really come full circle. We've really made good recovery. It wasn't without mistakes and hiccups. I don't want it to sound like it's from point A to point B, because it really isn't. It's not linear. But we really had come a long way in our recovery. And I found myself thinking about how little there was in the way of education and guidance and support for the bereaved. Because you have to remember, at that point in time, the Internet was in its infancy. Basically, you had chat rooms and porn. That was pretty much your menu. And I didn't need really either one of those things at that time. I still don't. But there really wasn't a lot in the way of support. And I grabbed a pen and I started making notes on a legal pad because I'm old school. And when I'd finished, I actually had written what eventually became the table of contents for the first book.
Oh, interesting.
And a year after making those notes onto that pad, I founded one of the first online bereavement support organizations of its kind. And 3 years after that, the first book was published, and 2 more have followed since then.
And so that's where Widows Wear Stilettos come from.
Right. That was the first book.
Mm-hmm. And you know, that idea of widows wearing stilettos, I just think it's so neat because, you know, if you're grieving and you're going to be like miserable with yourself, you're probably not going to put on those stilettos.
Well, you know, that title actually came from a real live moment at Mike's funeral, which was very, very large because he was a very high-profile police officer here in Southern California. And there were close to 1,000 people there, and it was very grand and beautiful and everything that he deserved. But you know, in the years leading up to that horrible moment in time, all you're thinking about is survival. That's all you're thinking about is getting through today. That's really it. The word widow never entered my consciousness because that's not where your headspace is. It wasn't until we were sitting graveside and the honor guard was preparing the American flag to present to the widow. And that was the first time that I allowed that word into my consciousness. And the very next thing, as ridiculous as it sounds, the very next thing that came into my head is I can't be a widow. I wear 4-inch heels. I listen to heavy metal, and I listen to Prince, and I want to talk more about music because I loved your first segment. I know all the words to the Rocky Horror Picture Show. I drink lemon drop martinis. It wasn't the image of widow that many people have in their heads. And in using that title, it was my way of saying widowhood isn't what you think. It doesn't look like what you think. Widowhood has many faces, and we come from many places, and we are all ages at all stages of our life. And that was my way of saying we're here too.
And you know, Carole, I think you get that point across when bad things happen to good women, and you tell stories that, as I read them, some of them were real. They were all sad, but some of them were real heartbreakers.
I know.
And as I read them, I thought, how does anybody get over something like that? And I think that's what I liked about it, because it was like a go-to book for what we should do or could do if it's happening to us or if we know somebody's having those kinds of challenges. And not just the loss of a spouse, but other kinds of losses, like you cover the loss of a job or a house, financial difficulties. And so I like how you organize the book. But, Carole, listen, say you're the person in crisis, and I'm your friend or colleague or your neighbor, and you say there are a few things that I should never say and never do.
Right.
And let's take those two things separately. What are a few things I should never say? Because, you know, I'm a mouthy chickie. And
no wonder we get along so well. The never says. First of all, don't say, I know how you feel. Again, it's just like call me if you need anything. On its face, it sounds very empathetic and like you're trying to relate, and I get that. But here's the problem with I know how you feel. If I say, Annmarie, I know how you feel, the 9 times out of 10, I'm going to follow that by the words, because when I was going through this, I felt like this, and I did that, and I. It's not about me. It's about you. It's about that person. What you can say, you know, I understand, I get it. That, because those things are not going to lead to spotlight shifting. Leave the spotlight where it belongs. It belongs on the person who has just shared a bad thing with you, regardless of what that bad thing is. The second reason you don't want to say that is you really can't compare one situation to another. One of my favorite apples and oranges examples is another radio show host who I love. She's wonderful. She has lost her husband. Her bad thing happened to also be spousal loss. And a male colleague said, I know exactly how you feel because when John Lennon was murdered, I didn't know how I was going to go on. Now, I want to be clear. I'm a huge fan of John Lennon. Huge fan. And I cried for his widow. I, too, am a widow. I lost a husband. I got to tell you, it's not the same thing. So people tend to, whether they mean to or not, they tend to compare situations which are incomparable. You know, I believe it's in the book, the horror of one woman who had just lost her child, and she shared this, and the person responded by sharing the loss of her 105-year-old great aunt. Definitely a loss, and it definitely should be mourned, but would you call it comparable?
Yeah, you can't. You know what? I think people just try to relate. They try and figure out what is in their experience.
Right. But understand that in doing so, it can be devastating. Another problem that we see a lot is when someone who's divorced, which is a horrible thing to go through, looks at a widow and says, I know how you feel, I'm divorced. That's not going to work, and it can create divisiveness. So let's leave the spotlight where it belongs with that person, and let's listen to what they have to say instead of interjecting our horror into their dynamic. Not right now. We don't want to say, you know, Annmarie, it's been a year, it's been 6 months, it's been 2 years. You should be over it. Why aren't you over it? What's the matter with you? Well, nothing is matter.
But you know, Carole, I just had this conversation with someone whose spouse passed away a year ago, January, and it's been about a year and a half, and she's devastated, and I understand that. But she's not doing anything to move her life forward, and I'm concerned for her health.
And that's a good thing. Being concerned for somebody's health. If you see them coping destructively, or you see that they are not being proactive in their healing, that's okay. But to unilaterally pronounce that somebody should be over it because X amount of time has gone by can be even more destructive. First of all, they will take that into their head and they'll think, well, I'm not, quote, over it, mostly because there's no such thing. And so there must be something wrong with me. And that can be paralytic. I mean, that can stop you cold, even if you are being proactive. Secondly, after a bad thing has happened, not just loss, but any bad thing, do you realize that the second year and the third year can actually be worse than the first?
Wow.
Isn't that interesting? Then that's something that people don't think about. Your healing timeline is not like my healing timeline. And my healing timeline isn't like my daughter's healing timeline. We can't, again, it's that apples and oranges thing. If you think that somebody is in crisis, say, I'm worried about you. Don't use the words over it, but you seem to be stuck, or you seem to be very, very sad, or you seem to be, and let them talk, and if they're not forthcoming, make suggestions of where they can find support. Sometimes it's just a question of, I call it putting away the pants. And that comes from a story when I was coaching a widow years ago. Her husband had been gone for 4 years, and not only hadn't she gone through his things, his pants were still folded over the railing at the end of their bed.
Oh, my.
And everybody was beating up on her about, you have to go through his things, you have to sell the house, you have to, and she was paralyzed. So I listened to her story, and I said, let's set a goal. In the next 30 days, just hang up the pants. Just put the pants away. And she says, you mean I don't have to go through things? I said, no, you don't have to do a thing. Just see if in the next 30 days you can bring yourself to put the pants on a hanger and hang them in his closet. And it was about a week or 10 days later, she emailed me absolutely triumphant. I mean, you could hear trumpets. She'd hung up the pants. And that was her first step forward back into a new life. And this is something that you can encourage your friend. Have her come join. She can find thousands of people just like her on Facebook at Carole Brody-Fleet or at WWS Peer-Led Support Forum, people who are just like her. And just putting her in a community of people who get it can be a first step. That can be her hanging up the pants moment. Has she read books? Has she sought any kind of support? Has she gathered healing tools? It's more about asking questions.
Right, and those are good questions. Those are good questions. And Carole, we need to take a break, so I'm going to ask everybody to sit tight, and we'll be back in just a couple of minutes. You're listening to the Friday Happy Hour. Are you one of those women who lived the first part of your life as a really good girl? That is, you did all the right things and followed all the so-called rules for women? I was like that too. But have you noticed that once you passed 40, you have less patience for those rules? Maybe you even think that the rules really don't make sense for you anymore. Maybe they never did and you just didn't realize it. Do you want to go where other recovering good girls meet to inspire each other and support their new empowered selves? Then join me, Annmarie Kelly, and some very fabulous victorious women. We're on Facebook at the Victorious Woman Project. So go to facebook.com/Victorious Woman Project. I'll talk to you there. Welcome back to the Friday Happy Hour, and I'm here with Carole Brody-Fleet. And Carole, something else that you talked about that I think I've just been hearing it so many times in the last couple of years, and maybe it has to do with the age or maybe something else, but it's that betrayal in marriage, and you say, and when bad things happen to good women, it's like a betrayal like no other. And you know, so what do you think about that? I have to tell you, when I was single, I had too many married men hit on me. I used to get frustrated because I couldn't get a date with a single guy. But the married men they were like all over it, and so one of them was even involved in that marriage encounter movement. And he and his spouse would host, like a couples weekends at a retreat house, and they'd be like the model couple. And I'd think, really? So I'm really jaded. And I know it's not just men. So you guys out there, I know it's not that just men to commit the betrayals. But how is it that infidelity is a betrayal like no other?
Because the reason is simple. You can't be betrayed by somebody that you didn't put trust into. And trust is even on a higher pedestal, I think, than love.
I think you're right.
It's because falling in love is pretty easy. You know, when it happens, we fall. Trust is very difficult. It's easy to give, but once betrayed, it's almost impossible to earn back. You cannot be betrayed without first having trusted. And when you have placed trust in somebody and they take that trust and they stomp all over it, I'm not sure if there's any greater emotional pain than betrayal. So that's what it is in a nutshell, is when you marry somebody, you have placed implicit and explicit trust in them. And they have taken that sacred trust and they have stomped all over it. And it is a horrible, terrible feeling, and that's why it is such a big issue. And betrayal doesn't just come in infidelity, as you've seen in the book, Annmarie. Betrayal manifests in different ways, but the most common and certainly the most talked about and obsessed over is within a marriage or exclusive relationship.
So, Carole, if you're the person that happened to, and if I was talking to you, I know what I would say, but after reading When Bad Things Happen to Good Women, I would be wrong. So what should I say to you? What's the best thing? If you're the person who's been betrayed, what's the best thing I could say to you? And the best way I could help you?
Well, first of all, the first thing you do is reassure the person that it's not their fault. It's nothing that she did, because as women, in addition to being fixers and nurturers, we automatically assume fault for someone else's actions. You cannot control the actions of another person. I mean, even our children, we only have control over that for a very short time. You know, long about the time the driver's license comes in, that's about the time that control starts to eke away. you must reassure her that it's not her. The fault of the betrayal lies with the betrayer. Period. End of story. When they say, oh, he strayed. No, he didn't. People don't stray. Animals stray. People have control over their actions. They really do. So you must reassure her that this is not your fault, and we're going to get you through this.
And you just said it. It's the responsibility belongs to the betrayer, not the betrayed.
Absolutely.
But what is? Give me the thing that I could do to help you. If you were the person, what's the best thing I could do to help you?
Actively encourage me to get the help that I need. Don't say you don't have to do this alone. There is help out there. For example, if the betrayal involved anything of a financial nature that might jeopardize her future, if she was scammed, if somebody cleaned out a checking account, she needs to seek help immediately. She can get help from lawyers. She can get help from banks. A lot of that help is free or low cost. If the betrayal is the result of a scam, she also needs to contact law enforcement. Again, with betrayal tends to come shame and humiliation. Take all that away from her by pointing her in the right direction. If the betrayal was emotional, she can benefit in a huge way by talking to an expert or a professional. And that doesn't mean spending thousands on a therapist necessarily, although they are wonderful help too. She can consult with her cleric. She can consult with her physician. She can consult, again, books, community, people who have been there and can help lift her up and help her design a healing path. Healing isn't just about loss of a person, and that's why I'm very excited about the book. There's so many different scenarios and bad thing situations in here, but most everything comes back to designing a path of healing.
Yep, and you know what?
Can do that.
And Carole, I really enjoyed When Bad Things Happen to Good Women. How can my listeners get a copy?
The book is in bookstores everywhere, in brick-and-mortar bookstores everywhere. It's also at all major book-buying sites online, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Tower, all the major book-buying sites, and it's available worldwide.
That's great. Carole, thank you so much for coming. The time went way too fast with you.
It really did. Thank you for having me, Annmarie. I hope we can do this again.
I hope so, too. And you have a good weekend.
You do the same.
Thank you. Okay, Victory Chicks, and you guys, I'm heading over to Longwood Gardens to have some chick time with my friend Teresa Hummel-Kralinger, who is a past guest. You might remember her from, almost 3 years ago, and she did a great job making the girlfriends laugh at this year's girlfriend gala, and we haven't gotten together like this, like that is outside of business or outside of doing stuff with our spouses for a really long time. So today we're doing it, and I'm looking forward to it. I hope you're doing something good, too. And thank you for coming today. You know how much I appreciate that you tune in, and I hope that you got some good info as well as some inspiration for finding your own passion and empowerment. And don't forget to go to the radio wrap-up on my website at victoriouswoman.com. If you want to chat a little with me and other Victory Chicks, you can join my private Facebook page called the Victory Chicks Community. And before we go, there's one last thing I want to leave you with this week, and it's the Lean In ad that Sheryl Sandberg did with other women like Lena Dunham, Kerry Washington, and Megan Kelly, and a couple other bold and powerful women. And it's called Lean In Together. The YouTube blurb says it celebrates the power of women supporting each other and the amazing things that happen when they do. I love it because it's all about that's what my work is all about. It's the intention behind both my books, Victorious Woman and Victory by Design, and it's why I started the Victorious Woman Project and now the Victory Chicks community on Facebook, and why I'm jazzed to connect with you Victory Chicks and even you guys because I know you want to because I know you want to make us happy. But I'm so glad to connect with you on Fridays at the Friday Happy Hour. And today I'm leaving you with a quote from Lean In's Sheryl Sandberg, who said, "I think as a woman you have to be more careful. You have to be more communal. You have to say yes to more things than men. You have to worry about things that men don't have to worry about. But once we get enough women into leadership, we can break stereotypes down. If you lead, you get to decide. You get to decide." And so, Victory Chicks, you're either going to lead or you're going to be led, and you can pick. So have one great and victorious weekend. I look forward to talking with you again next Friday. Jen's on.
Thanks for listening to this Friday Happy Hour. Make sure you subscribe, rate and review today's show. And join us again next week for the Friday Happy Hour with Annmarie Kelly.